Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm gonna continue covering the Sesvete Open tournament. So in the previous round, I faced Milan, my friend, my ex-coach, the guy who was staying at my apartment during the tournament, and I lost a mad game. You should see that if you haven't yet. In round 8, I faced a lower-rated opponent, but very experienced, and he isn't young, he's about 60, I would say. So I was pretty happy with my pairing. I mean, if you play tournament chess, you want to avoid kids, and if someone's over 20, then their rating is probably realistic. I decided to play against the King's Indian because my opponent always plays the King's Indian. And I have a system against the King's Indian defense that I've enjoyed playing for a while. Had some good results, especially in the games I'm about to show you in the future. I did play a ton of games since I recorded last. So we get into a King's Indian. Okay, and I played bishop e2. And playing this sort of semi-Averbakh setup after castles, bishop e3, gives white the option to play a normal King's Indian with knight f3, but you can also continue with g4 or with h4. And black's most common moves are a5 or knight d7 or knight a6. The idea being black wants to play either e5 or c5 most commonly. So e5, d5, this is normal. And then knight a6, knight d7 or a5, the knight wants to jump into c5. Instead of that, my opponent played knight c6, which luckily I had a look at the morning before the game. So you can play d5 here, but you don't have to play d5 here. I did play d5, and my opponent went knight e5. And now there are two ways to play. You can play h3, which is positional, and you just take away the g4 square for the knights and for the bishop. Or you can play the way I played, f4, and this is very concrete. Now, the most common move is knight g4, where white goes bishop d2. Instead of that, my opponent played knight ed7, and I was pretty confused. I mean, this makes very little sense to me. It seems like black lost a ton of time. So, again, I had the option to go knight f3 and play a sort of normal position, or go g4. I went g4, why not? He played e6. And now I went g5. I mean, it seems like white just has so much space and such a huge initiative that I thought I was going to win pretty quickly. He played knight e8. And now again, there are two ways to play. You can play queen d2, knight f3 and castle, which is what I ended up playing. Or you can play the way the position requires you to play, I would say. So you take on e6, fe6, and then you go h4. And the idea is very simple, just h5. You're going to go queen d2 and castle queenside. And I think this was much better. The engine says this is the best plan. It gives about +1 whatever white does. So white is always better, but this makes the most sense because with the pawn on g5, h5, and opening up the position with hg6 cannot be prevented. And then all I have to do is move the bishop away, play queen h2, and that's going to lead to checkmate. Instead I played queen d2, which is okay. My opponent played c6, and that's very loose. So I took on e6, fe6, and now again h4. Nothing changed that much except for the fact that the d6 pawn is weak. So if I go h4 and follow that up with queenside castles, that seems very good. Instead I played knight f3, which is still fine. The engine evaluation is the same, but I just think playing h4 would have been way more interesting. I mean, what does black even play? It's very hard to suggest a move. The engine says b5 is the best move. Okay, I mean, if b5 is the best move, then h4 had to be correct. But I decided to risk as little as possible because I thought I could go for this later on. He played queen a5, and now I had to make a choice. So you either castle queenside and allow bishop c3, where bc3 is sort of forced. I don't want to exchange queens. Or you castle kingside. So I did. Again, the engine here thinks h4 is the best move. You don't have to commit your king to c1. Instead, I castled kingside, which is fine and pretty normal position. White is better. Here, my opponent blundered. Knight c5. Okay, pause the video. And this is basically white to play and win. You don't win material, but find the crushing idea in this position. And while you do that, I'm gonna thank Chessbook, who are sponsoring the video. If you haven't tried Chessbook before, I would recommend that you check it out. There's a link in the description. It's, in my opinion, the best move to build and practice your opening repertoire. And what I've been doing in the last few videos is I've created a new Lichess account. It's HBY Booker. And I've connected it to my new Chessbook account. And I'm creating an English repertoire and playing c4 exclusively with white so that I can use all the features of Chessbook optimally. So what can you do with Chessbook? You can import your repertoire either by hand or by importing a PGN. Then you can, of course, practice those moves, and you can either focus on a specific part of your repertoire or just do everything. You can go through model games. And my favorite features are correcting your opening mistakes and going to the biggest gap in your opening. So if you go to your white repertoire and go to your biggest gap, it's going to tell you which part of your repertoire you haven't imported yet. That's, according to Chessbook, most important. And also, if you connect your Lichess account or your chess.com account to Chessbook and actually play the openings that are in your repertoire, you're going to have the opportunity to correct your mistakes. So since the last video, I've played, I think, 1 classical game and I played 1 blitz game. So I'm only doing a repertoire for white, so my black games are useless, but this is just a test. I want to see all the features. So I made 1 mistake. So let's see what I did. Yeah, okay, I know what I did. I played knight c3, but that's not precise. You want to go... The reason I played knight c3, and I'm going to show you that game, the reason I played knight c3 is because I didn't know what I'm supposed to play, and I got this position. So I played knight c3, and my opponent just equalizes with d5, and I basically have to play d4 here. And you can see that black scores extremely well, and if black wishes to play g6 here, they can, and it's completely equal. So instead of that, I'm going to go bishop g2. And that's my repertoire now. So that's the 1 mistake I made. So I'm going to continue doing the English repertoire, playing games and correcting my mistakes, and hopefully in a while have 100% complete repertoire. If you want to get this when I'm done, I can export it and share the PGN. I'm definitely going to put the PGN on Patreon, but if you want, you can message me, and if there's a way for me to give it to you, I will. Anyway, check out Chessbook, link in the description, so chessbook.com/hanging-pawns. And yeah, if you want to support me, consider becoming a premium member over there. The basic features are free, but if you want to import unlimited moves, it's $5 a month. It's definitely worth it. Thank you very much. Stay tuned for more chess. Let's go back to the video. Okay, so I have to be completely honest. The winning idea never crossed my mind. Never, ever. And when I was analyzing this position, I saw the idea. And I was looking at this position and I was trying to find an alternative to my move, which was obviously bad and led to huge trouble for me. The winning idea is e5. And there is absolutely no defense against this. The threat is very simple. I want to go ed6. So what can black do? If black plays d5, this is game over. Knight e5. My queen is amazing. This knight is very, very loose. For example, if bishop takes e5, fe5, and I don't know, b6, then rook f8, king f8, and queen d8. And the engine announce is made here. So after fe5, let's say not b6. Let's say black keeps covering d8. Let's say knight d7. After knight d7, again, takes, knight takes, rook f1. Let's say they take on e5 and I just go c5. And this is way too much. The engine gives this as +5. These pieces are never going to get into the game, and it's clear why this is crushing. Now let's go back. If not d5, then let's say black plays d5. This is even worse. Now I take knight d5, and the queen is hanging, the knight is hanging. So let's assume queen takes d2. Knight e7 check, and now if king h8, then there's absolutely no compensation. So let's say king f7, trying to win the knight, then knight d2, the knight is hanging. If king takes e7, wouldn't have to look at that. What else? If the king doesn't take, then the knight has to move. But where does the knight move? Does the knight go to d7? That seems absurd. +6 for white. And finally, the best engine move, knight d7, simply giving up a pawn. This needs no explanation. I mean, this is just a crushing position with a pawn on d6 and these pieces not doing anything. Okay, instead of e5, which would have been crushing, I allowed my opponent to go into a position which went from +3 for me, which would have been with e5, to more than -1 for black. I played a dreadful move. I played bishop d4. I cannot even explain the idea behind bishop d4. I don't remember what I wanted to do. The game was 2 months ago. But I'm pretty sure I was expecting e5. And my idea probably was something to do with the weak e-pawn. But okay, I took fe5 and he played bishop h3, which I'd expected, and I played rook fb1, which seemed crushing. This is the main variation I looked at before bishop d4, threatening b4. So now black has to move either the knight or the queen. Has to. Okay, he went knight e6. I threw in b4, he went queen d8, and then I realized that I'm just worse. There's nothing I can do here. I have to play bishop e3. And I have to give the pawn back. If I take on d6, then knight takes d4, knight d4, bishop d4, check, queen d4 and queen g5, and I resign. This is checkmate. It's just, I cannot take on d6. So I had to go bishop e3. I have to defend the g5 pawn. I have to. So he takes d5. I trade queens because I don't know what else to do. And I go rook d1. And he goes knight d4. And at this point, I was expecting that I was going to lose this position in a couple of moves. There's basically no defense against black simply playing knight c7, knight e6. And when black establishes full control over the d4 square, my only source of counterplay is going to be b5, which doesn't do anything. And also, I have to move my knight away from the center because the knight is hanging. And then, after I played knight h4, which is the only move, there's knight f3 in the position, there's knight e2 in the position. I mean, he played knight d6, which I don't understand. I think he should have gone knight c7 straight away, or he should have taken on e2 and played knight d6 with pressure on these two pawns. So I think this would have been fairly simple. I mean, I'm just losing here. Or he should have gone knight c7. He went knight d6, threatening bishop e2. Sorry, knight e2. So I played bishop d3. Here he played knight e8, which again is not precise, but he realized that he had to go to c7 and to e6. Instead, he should have just gone bishop g4. And when I go rook d2, he goes rook f3. And if I take, then knight takes, and I resign. And if, let's say, bishop d4, then he takes on d3, rook d3, e d4, and this passed pawn, after, let's say, knight d1, is too much. The pawn is going to roll forward, and then I'm going to lose a whole rook. Instead, he went knight e8. So finally, I have a chance to go c5 and to activate my bishop. He played king h8. Oh no, sorry, he went knight c7 first. Rook a c1, king h8 now, bishop c4 anyway, knight c6, and this is... Strategically, I can resign. I can hope for something tactical to happen for my opponent to blunder, but as I said, my opponent is, I believe, stronger than his rating, and he has beaten strong players, and he was over 2100 until he probably played a bunch of kids and hemorrhaged his rating points. So rook d2, bishop g4, good move. Knight d1, bad move, but what else? I mean, I should have taken on e6 probably, but I did that a bit later. So knight f4, it's just crushing. I cannot move my knight away from h4. I cannot do anything. Knight c3, a6, rook e1, and in this position black had an easy win, which I didn't see. Luckily my opponent didn't see it either. He could have gone h6. The idea is if I take, then bishop f6 and knight f3 is hanging, so I have no way to save my position. If I go bishop f2, he just takes, goes knight f3, and on h6, if I ignore it, if I play something like king h1, then he takes. I move my knight and then knight f3. Okay, but he played rook f8, which is still crushing. Okay, rook b1. I want to go a4, b5 because there's nothing else, and I'm trying to survive. Knight d6, and now I finally exchanged, which is correct. He took with the bishop, which is bad. He should have taken with the knight, and this gave me the option to play rook bd1, which would have been good. This is almost equal. Now I'm not hanging anything. I'm threatening to exchange all the, or I'm threatening to win the rook. He has to move the rook away. If he trades once, then my rook controls the d file, and the position is absolutely fine. I don't know why I didn't play this. I played a4, which seemed more interesting. Or okay, I had a good tournament so far, but I'm playing a low-rated player, so rating-wise and tournament-wise, I have to win. I was actually fighting for the prize to be the first player below 2,000. So a4 seemed more interesting. Rook bd1 is just a normal move. Okay, bishop g4, b5, ab, and rook d7. Yeah, I don't know what to say about rook d7. I may have written something incorrect on my score sheet, but this is the only position I could make work. So I'm pretty sure he did play rook d7, because the alternative rook e7 blunders a rook, and rook c7 is illegal. So I don't know. He did not take on d2, and I played rook d6 here, which is okay. Rook takes d6, c d6, rook d8. I threw in this and bc6. And I actually thought that I had a great idea here and that I was going to win the game. So rook b8 is hanging. I should say that this is completely equal. It's just equal now. I managed to equalize, luckily, because my opponent didn't play precisely. So if he moves the rook away from the 8th rank, then just rook b8 winning a bishop is the threat. So I played bishop b6. And the idea is obviously if rook d6, then I can throw in bishop c7 and follow that up with rook b8, and the game is over. So on bishop b6, he played rook d7. And in this position, I should have played something normal, like bishop e3. I definitely should have done this. And if he takes on d6, still the same trick. So he has two ways to move on something like king g8. And now let's say knight d1. If he takes on d6, then there's rook b8 again. Plays king f7, I just go knight f2, and my pieces are okay. Should be about equal. But I went through with my plan. I played bishop c7, which is a very bad move. He, of course, plays bishop f8. Now, rook b8 is no longer threatened. There's no point in playing rook b8. In fact, if I go rook b8 here, I'm just going to lose after king g7. And this is a waste of tempo. So I played rook b6, which is even worse. Again, I should have... It's hard to suggest a normal move, but probably knight d1 with the idea of knight f2, just getting a piece into play somehow. And rook b6 loses tactically. I mean, pause the video and punish me if you want to. It's a pretty simple tactic. I should mention that my opponent had, I want to say, less than 5 minutes, and he looked extremely stressed. So I wanted to play quickly, and I wanted to confuse him. That's a strategy I've seen strong players use. If you play weak moves that aren't tactical, then, you know, they're going to see it. But if you play moves that are tactical, even if they are weak, maybe they don't see it. He didn't see this. Not that I saw that rook b6 loses. I just played it. So the winning idea is, of course, rook c7, and I have to take and then check. And I resign. The bishop covers the queening square. Instead, he played bishop d6, which is still winning, just not winning immediately. Bishop d6, rook d6. And I played knight g2, giving up another pawn because I had to get some pieces into play. My knight on h4 does nothing. So he takes the pawn on g5, knight e3, bishop e6, and knight b5, losing immediately. He can throw in bishop h3 check, which he did end up doing. The idea is, of course, the pawn is pinned. I want to take the rook. But he could have won immediately with rook d2. I didn't see this. The idea is if I save my knight, then he has mate in 3. So bishop h3, wherever the king goes, knight f3, rook h2 is going to be mate. So, for example, king g1, check, here. So knight b5, and he just created a square for the rook, which is still winning. Okay, here, and now I actually had equality. And after the game, so I have to mention that I was pretty irritated with a couple of people standing next to our board, and one guy even sitting on the board next to ours and making some noise with his hand and being obviously into our game and sort of commenting with his face. That was extremely annoying. And I didn't have time to call the arbiter over because my opponent was in time trouble. I wanted him to lose as much time as possible. In any case, I'm not saying that's why I missed this, but I was annoyed. So of course, check, and I pick up the rook. Not that I can draw this or win this, but it's equal according to the engine. I would give black a practical advantage, definitely, because black has 2 pawns and I can probably never win. It just doesn't seem likely that I can make any progress, but this would have been much easier, probably a draw. I played knight e8 instead. He played rook f8, knight d6, knight e6, knight dc4, knight d4 check, knight cd4, dc4, yeah, okay. Bishop f1 check. And in this position I should have just taken the bishop and again taken the pawn on e5. But I thought, okay, let's not trade pieces. I mean, if I can keep the pieces on the board, there's a chance for a draw. If you're worse, you want to trade pawns, not pieces. If all the pawns disappeared, it would be a draw. If black had 1 pawn, I could sacrifice a knight. So I didn't want to trade pieces. But it's fairly simple. This endgame, I mean, there really isn't much black can do. This is fine, because the knight is hanging. Instead, I played king d2 and bishop c4, knight c4, rook e8, king d3, king g7. He missed that the pawn on e5 was hanging, so I took it. And now this definitely is a draw. This is a drawn rook and pawn endgame. And at this point, after rook e6, king e3, I played h4 and offered a draw. My opponent declined, of course. He has a pawn up. He needs to play for a win. He played h6. I played king f4, and this is an easily drawn endgame. But watch how I messed it up. He played g5, takes, king e3. Okay, now the point is, any king and pawn endgame, a pawn up for my opponent, is fine for me if my king can get the opposition or if it's closer to the pawn. If we trade a couple of pawns, then I can get a Philidor because my king is in perfect position to prevent both pawns from moving forward. He played king e5, I played rook a6, c5. Of course, if I trade rooks, I lose. So rook c6, rook g8. Rook g8 is fine. It would have been easier to go rook f8, and now there's absolutely no progress to be made for my opponent. If c4, then I have rook f5. And if g4, then I have rook g8. And I'm just going to take the pawn. There's no way to defend the pawn. Instead, I went rook g8 thinking I was pretty smart. And that's insane. This is still a draw, but it's much harder to draw now. My opponent plays king f6. And I blundered. I played king d3, which loses the game immediately. I should have gone rook f8. And on king g7, I just go rook f1. And let's say c4, rook c1, this pawn is going to fall. Okay, and if not c4, if let's say g4, then I can just take the pawn. I mean, and if the king goes back to, let's say, g6, then I can play e5, and I have enough counterplay. Instead, I went king d3. And after c4 check, king c3, this is busted. He goes rook c7. The idea is he wants to cover. He wants to cover against any possible checks, and I have no more counterplay. And he also wants to go Rook G7 if necessary. And in this position, I'm losing. I know I'm losing, and I play E5 check. And my opponent says, "Okay, it's a draw." And I had a confident face on. I was bluffing this entire endgame, and even though I knew that I was lost here, I had a face like, okay, E5, come on, let's get it over with. And when he said, okay, a draw, I accepted, and I still kept a cool face. We signed the score sheets, and then Milan comes over and says, what about King F5? And I said, shh, come on. I mean, not that he can continue playing after signing the score sheets, but it still would have been quite upsetting for him, I imagine, knowing that he had a win. I mean, the win is extremely simple. I couldn't see what to do here. I played E5 instantly, pretending that it was, you know, E5 draw. Of course, if he takes the pawn, it is a draw. But he doesn't take the pawn. He plays King F5 and I resign, and I would have resigned here. There's nothing I can do. The pawn just rolls forward. I never have E6, E7. That's absurd. I mean, what? So I was lucky. I should have lost that game. And I mean, had I found E5, I would have won. But I didn't. I played like an idiot. My opponent outplayed me strategically. He played a beautiful game, missed a couple of wins, and then messed up the endgame, unfortunately for him. I think he should have won. He deserved to win. And I mean, maybe he needs to study basic endgames a bit more. Maybe if he had a bit more time on the clock, he would have realized that this is winning. But he was under a minute, and when I played E5, he just said, okay, draw. So I got away with one. Thank you for watching. I'm going to show you round 9 tomorrow. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.